Talk and rock radio, where friends meet at the intersection of life, inspiration, and music. Here's your host, Rick Kern.
Well, it's March 16th, 2021. We'd like to thank everyone for joining Talk and Rock Radio for our very first episode that I've titled Dalton Powell and My Wish. Welcome, DP.
Hey, Rick. Good to talk to you.
Good talking to you, man. Well, this is an episode that I've really dreamed a lot about and thought a lot about, and it's finally happening, and I'm really glad to have you on board with us talking about your history and what you've done in your life. You've got a very colorful life. What I thought we'd do before we get into the really good stuff, it's all good, but the really good stuff, I want to have you share with the world out there about your early years.
Sure. I was born in El Paso. Went to Lamar, Rusk, and Austin High School. And my first taste of live rock and roll was at the high school gym at Austin High. When I was still in, maybe 15, 16, there was a guy named Johnny Garman. And he had a little garage band called Johnny Garman and the Shadows. And they used to play high school, they'd play in the cafeteria and in the gym and little gigs like that. But that was the first real time I thought, hey, that looks like they're having a ball, And so that was really my first taste of live rock and roll music. And that, of course, back in those days, we were still inventing rock and roll.
Yeah, for sure.
But,
now, I was going to ask you, what year was that, Dalton? What year was when you first saw him?
Probably 56, 57.
56, 57. Okay. Yeah.
Now, he went on to become a TV guy, a TV newscaster for a long time.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what instrument did he play? Was he guitar or what did he play?
Yeah, he played guitar and sang, and he had a guitar and a bass and a drummer, and I don't really remember who they were.
And what kind of music were they playing?
Oh, it was just kind of probably be called rockabilly nowadays.
Sure. And was that the moment that you decided that you wanted to be a drummer, or did you play other instruments like in the bands in grade school and high school, or how did that come about?
Oh, well, when I was still in grade school, I met Jim Reese, so he and I were buddies from the beginning.
Right.
And I had some friends that, and Jim was an excellent musician, and he could play guitar. He had taught me to, how to play some old Fats Domino and Jerry Lee Lewis stuff, basically just banging chords on the piano. And that's kind of where I learned to do it. And some friend of mine heard that I could play a little piano, so they asked me to come join their garage band. And so I went over and I hung out with them, and we jammed and played just typical garage band stuff. And we were maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, and the guy that played drums was one of my best friends named Colin Henry, and I used to watch him play, and that's how I learned to do it, just by watching Colin and listening to the music. And every chance I got, I'd get behind his kit and bang on him, And that was really my first garage band. But from there, I went on to play with Jim Reese with a band called the Royal Lancers. And that was actually a real band. All the guys, they learned to change chords and everything, So. But Jim asked me if I wanted to play piano with them because they had two singers that would alternate between frontman and drummer. And that was Googie Dermeyer and Jerry Bright. And they used to alternate, but they decided that the guy up front got all the girls, so they decided, well, we need to get a full-time drummer so we can both be up front, where we can be seen.
And battle for the girls, right?
Yeah, and I was banging piano,
Yeah.
But we had heard about Bobby. The first time I ever saw Bobby Fuller was at a high school football game up at Austin High School.
Yeah.
And at halftime, they brought out the bands, the marching bands, and they did their thing. And then they rolled a platform out into onto the field in front of the band, and Bobby came out and did a drum solo, and with the marching band. And that was the first time I ever saw him. But not too long after that, we knew the guy could play drums, so we asked him if he'd like to play with us. So he came over and he played drums with us while I was still banging piano. But I think he always, in the back of his mind, wanted to be a guitar player, singer, songwriter, you know?
Sure.
And one night when he was still playing with, I guess we were the Embers by this time,
Mm-hmm.
and he decided he'd written a little bubblegum song that he wanted to record. And a bunch of us went over to his house in his living room and recorded a little thing called "You're in Love."
Yep.
and I played drums on it. I guess I was his first drummer, and it was a snare drum and a brush, and I just kept the beat with that brush on the snare drum.
Wow.
But that was my first gig with Bobby on the drums.
And then when was that recorded? I remember the song very well, but were you doing that in his living room there where the studio was, or was that at a different place?
No, his studio, he had a den, and then he added on part of his garage was his control room.
Right.
But and this was just in his family living room there on Album Street.
Right.
That was before he had even started his studio.
Before he turned it into a studio. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. What year would that have been?
I'd say maybe 58, 59.
58, 59. Okay. So when you were playing with him, besides the Royal Lancers and all that and the Embers, what other groups would have been going on before the Bobby Fuller Four?
Oh, there was an old guy named Joe Ritchie.
Right.
He used to play around here with a band called the Rock Kings,
Mm-hmm.
and they were real good. They were all good musicians. And for a while there, Charlie Daniels was in El Paso, and he was playing some of the clubs around, Dyer Street and stuff like that. And he and Joe Ritchie got together and put together a band called the Jesters.
Right.
And we used to go out and jam with them on Sunday afternoons at some of the bars on Dyer Street, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the main bands we used to listen to.
Yeah, I always heard great things about that band. Of course, you're a little older than I am, but, I didn't hear quite a few of these groups, but I have listened to their music through the years, with their records and everything that they did. So I was able to play a little bit of catch up with them, but unfortunately I was too young to be able to see them. Well, we're coming up to the point in this discussion that is very important to me, and that is around a little later than the dates that we're talking about here. You said 58, 59, in 63, on a Thursday night, I was at the Skylanes bowling alley with my dad. He was part of the Lions Club bowling team that they had, and they would be there on Thursday nights playing competition bowling, with the other teams around. And I would go and hang out with him. I was 13 years old when that happened, and I remember this one specific Thursday night. I heard this incredible sound coming out of what looked to be like a bar, and that's exactly what it was. It was the Little Dipper Lounge there at Skylanes, and I went over to the bar doorway there. Of course, I couldn't go in; I was too young, but I stood there in total awe of what I was seeing and hearing. And of course, it was you, and it was Jim Reese and Bobby Fuller and his brother Randy, really just playing some incredible music. I remember specifically that night telling my dad right after he got done, I said, "Dad, you got to hear this band." I said, "They're incredible." Of course, you guys were the very first live band I had ever seen. Okay, this was my first exposure at 13 years old to a live event.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, it was really cool because now that Dad was with me, he could take me into the bar, and I remember just as clear as it was, man. The memory is right there. We got a table right by the stage, right in front, and I'm sitting there drinking my cherry Coke and watching you guys. And all I know is that I loved what I heard, and it was at that moment that I said, Dad, this is my wish. This is what I want to do someday. I want to be in a band like this, playing that kind of music. And he said, "Yeah, they're pretty good, aren't they?" You know, and I think that was probably the night that I met all you guys for the first time. You know, and on the break,
Yeah.
you guys came by and we chatted briefly, and I was in total awe of you guys. I was starstruck. You know, it was really.
What a thrill it must have been.
Oh man, it was really really good, and you know, you guys were just incredible. You know, I mean, and of course you've heard it before, but it never gets old to say it again. And but anyway, you know, things happened after that for me. But you know, I played in my own garage bands. I started playing in garage bands when I was probably about 11 or 12, and just kind of, you know, doing the typical neighborhood thing. And of course, where I lived off of North Loop down there were 5 drummers around within a 2 or 3 block radius. You know, it was Gene Bailey from the Motivators. There was Barry Davis, you know, who played with Gorilla and Legend, those guys. And there's Johnny Thompson,
Yeah.
Buddy Thompson, and myself. So there were like 5 drummers here, all playing with the different neighborhood musicians and stuff. So we had a lot of fun. But I want to get back a little bit more to, you know, some of the people that you know that have really been your inspiration. I know from the time that you played with Bobby and everything. You know, we can talk a little bit about that. What were some of the standout moments that you guys had, you know, when you were playing in town? I know before you went on the road and did some tours, you did some really pretty cool stuff here at a club that Bobby's dad was responsible for starting. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, the Rendezvous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was out in Northeast El Paso. It was a big old room. And that was Bobby's rock and roll club. And it was a place for him to play. And man, that people came from everywhere because it was the only place for kids to go, you know, and hear live music. And Bobby had a couple of bands while he played there. He had Larry Thompson and
Billy Webb. Billy Webb.
Billy Webb, yeah.
Yeah.
They played with him out there for a while, and I played with him out there with Jim for a while. And
They were called the
it was- it
Fanatics,
was a-
right?
I don't really remember.
Yeah, I think they were.
that's what they were called at that time.
Yeah, the Fanatics, right?
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun because, like I said, it was the only game in town, so every kid from all over town came out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was our first, probably El Paso's first really real rock and roll venue, you know?
Well, you know, you mentioned Larry and Billy. What was the transitional moment when you became the official drummer that played with Bobby's first band, the Bobby Fuller Four? How did that come about, and how did you make the cut? You know, whenever all that was taking place with all the choices that Bobby had, obviously. Go ahead and
Well,
tell me what you can remember about that.
well, I don't really remember. I think Billy and Larry had maybe got an offer to play with Joe Ritchie
Right.
or somebody else, and they left Bobby, and Bobby knew that I could keep a beat on the drums. And, you know, I never did set out to become a drummer. It was just something that I had a knack for, and it was fun. And people would call me and say, "Hey, I'll give you $10 if you'll come out and play drums for me tonight. I even got the drums, you know." Well, what was I supposed to do? So I went out and had fun and got paid for it. And it just kind of grew from there. And Bobby knew I could keep a beat, so he asked me if I wanted to play with him. And I think that's when Jim and I first started playing with him. He knew both of us were at least competent to play the stuff he wanted to play.
Sure. Yeah.
He was Buddy Holly was his idol.
Right.
And I bet we played every song Buddy Holly ever did. And I thought The Law was just one of the songs in our repertoire.
Right.
That we learned that off an old Crickets album. And it was written by a guy named Sonny Curtis, who was one of the Crickets back in the day.
Right.
And like I said, it was just on our song list, but everybody liked it so much that they just said, you guys need to record that. And so we recorded a version. I did one with him in his studio out on Album Street.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Larry Thompson might have done a version. And, of course, they all sound almost identical. The only way I can tell the one that Dwayne and I did is when they got to California, they redid it and put a hi-hat splash on the 2 and the 4 in the song. And if you listen for that,
right.
If you listen for that, that's probably Dwayne's version.
Okay.
But they're almost identical. And that was when Jim and I first started playing with Bobby. That's the kind of stuff we were playing. So
I was going to ask you what was the defining moment when you all realized that you're ready to leave El Paso for bigger opportunities? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think Bobby always, from the very beginning, he didn't want to just be the best band in El Paso. He wanted to be a rock star.
Sure.
So I think it was always in the back of his mind to pack up and go to California.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the rest of us, we'd go along with anything. But at the time he finally decided to move out there permanently, I had a brand new baby and a real job. So I told him I couldn't go, and he heard about this guy, Dwayne. I think Dwayne was maybe playing at the Senate the Senate Lounge up in Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm.
And Bobby asked him to come down and see if he wanted to play. So that worked out. And shortly thereafter, we were playing a gig over on Montana Street somewhere, Johnny Fairchild's Club or something. And Dwayne showed up, and within a day or two, they had gone to California, and I just stayed here. But because they didn't have any gigs, they didn't know Bobby's dad, his family really backed him all the way.
Right.
His dad had some pretty good money, and they went out there and they got a nice apartment, Bobby and Randy and their mom, and Jim and Dwayne, Jim told me there were times when they'd take the ketchup packets home from restaurants to make soup.
Wow.
And they lived on avocados that fall off the trees out there,
Oh,
He said they roughed it for a while. But, of course, Bobby had, he had his backers out there. And I couldn't do that with a brand new kid. So,
right.
But, Bobby was never happy with Dwayne.
Yeah.
And 4 or 5 times during the following year, he called me trying to get me to come out there. And one night I saw him on national TV on the old Danny Kaye show. And I was in the other room in my house up in Santa Fe, and I said, hey, that sounds familiar. And I went in there, and it was the Bobby Fuller 4 on the Danny Kaye show. So I said, well, man, maybe they're actually going to be able to make a living out there. So the next time he called, I just packed up and went out there. And that was about, I think, probably in November of '65.
Now, when you did that, I know you did a tour back east also, because you shared with me one night over at your house that really cool schedule that you have up framed up on your wall there that showed all the places that you played and how much you made and all that.
All the big bucks they paid the stars in those days.
That's what I was going to have you share with everybody, is that I think this is kind of a people think that because you're getting big and you're a star and all that you're making the big bucks, but you want to share with everybody a little bit about what kind of money you guys were making. I mean, it blew me away. I couldn't believe it when I saw that thing that you had there.
Well, basically, we just made union scale,
Yeah.
you know, and it ended up to be about $35 a night for a gig.
Yeah.
And when we got back to California, I think maybe some of the bigger TV shows like Hullabaloo and some of those, they paid like $125 or something like that.
Right.
But we never made much more than union scale.
Yeah, that's amazing, you know.
But, you know, there was really not that much money being made on it at that time anyway, you know. Most of the gigs were, you know, they'd hire a band and the kids could get in for a quarter, you know. So it wasn't really a big money thing back in the early 60s.
Yeah. Well,
You know, all the big money didn't start coming in until, you know, several years after that.
so when you did that tour back east, then you headed back to LA right after that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I was going to ask you, as far as that success that was starting to set in with you guys, how did you keep yourself grounded while all this was taking place? I mean, you must have been going like, wow, you know, we're going to be stars, you know, we're going to be like the Beatles, you know? I mean, how did you keep it all in perspective without going too crazy about it?
Well, I don't think I have a very big ego.
No,
So
you
I
don't.
didn't think like that. I think
Yeah.
Jim and Bobby did.
Yeah.
And, you know, they wanted to be big rock and roll stars. I was having a good time playing with a good band, you know,
Sure.
and traveling around, and it just didn't register to me that we were stars because I didn't think like that, you know.
Now, was Catherine with you during all of that time, or?
No,
Okay.
I was married to Howard Steele's sister
Okay.
at the time.
Right.
I guess you know who Howard Steele is.
He'll be one of
And,
my episodes down the road.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, I was married to his sister,
Right.
and of course, that didn't work out, you know, but
Right.
we had a son together, and that's the reason I stayed in El Paso.
Yeah. And a mighty fine son, I might add that. Man, he's one of the really special people that we always enjoy visiting with when we see him.
Cool guy.
You know, good guy. Well, you know, as far as let's go from there now. We're not going to get into all the stuff about Bobby and how it ended up and all that, because that's not where we want to go. But I do want to have you talk a little bit more about after the worst part of what took place out in California. What happened after that? How you came back to El Paso? You want to talk a little bit about who all you played with when you came back? And
Well, if you don't mind going off on a little sidetrack for a minute,
let's do it.
back in the early 60s and late 50s, Jim Reese had a buddy named Mike Shockley that was already playing for country music
Mm-hmm.
in some of the country bars around El Paso. And there were several of those back in the 50s, you know, where they had live music 6 nights a week. And they had a pretty good following. And Mike Shockley and Jim were best friends, and he got Jim into country music. And as a result of that, Jim got me into country music. And when that Nashville sound hit, I really liked that stuff, you know, the old Ray Price and Buck Owens and some of that stuff. I just loved it. And Jim and I both played with several pretty good country bands during that time, too.
Jim was a great guitar player, could play it all, you know. That's one thing I
Jim
remember
was
the most about him. He was
main influence, bar none, in my musical career.
yeah, no doubt. Now that I remember the name Mike Shockley. What was the name of some of those bands that he was involved with?
The main one I recall we were called the City Slickers, but some of the others the names just kind of escaped me because like 60 years ago, you know.
Sure.
But several of the prominent bands around here that Mike played with.
Well, was Gail Hageman one of those?
Much rock and roll, but
Gail Hageman, I think, was one of those guys that played with Dub, Purvis, and a lot of those country artists. Back.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't remember the names, but I remember Dub Purvis for sure. He was quite a fiddler.
Yeah, he was. Very, very good one.
But anyhow, I was all the time we were inventing rock and roll, I was playing country music too, and actually getting paid for that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so when you headed back to El Paso, who was the first group you played with when you got back home?
The first guy Jim and I hooked up with was Mike Ciccarelli and Howard Steele. Howard.
The Maggots, right?
Yeah, it was the very final version of the Maggots, because there had been a bunch of good different players in the Maggots, and most of them were pretty good players. And Ciccarelli and Howard were left, so we put a little thing together, and I guess we were still called the Maggots. I don't know, but that didn't last a whole long time. I don't know whether there was just no demand for us or there was no place to play. I don't even remember what happened to that band.
I remember hearing you guys. I don't recall exactly what venue it was, but I do remember hearing the group, and boy, it was mighty fine having Jim and Chick together. I remember the instrumental version of A Taste of Honey that you guys did, Herb Alpert's big hit, and
yeah.
Oh man, that song has stood out all these years. I've talked to Chick about it numerous times, and we've talked about some of their old songs, but that was one of the standout songs. And I mean, it's kind of weird because y'all were playing some great rock music, but that particular song, for some reason, always hung with me all these years. It's kind of.
Well, I think it was just fun to play. It was a neat song.
It was, yeah. It was very up tempo, and everybody liked it. But
yeah,
that was a really neat group. Well, let's go into what happened after that. I think there was a guy here in town that I think we all know fairly well. A guy by the name of Rod Crosby.
Oh yeah, Brother Rod. Yeah, well. I hooked up with him when he still had Bob Wilson and Les Lockhart in the band. Bob played keyboards and sometimes bass on the keyboard, and Les Lockhart played the guitar, and they all sang. And I don't remember who his drummer was at the time, but for some reason his drummer was leaving, and I talked to Rod. I called him, or he called me, or something. But anyhow, I heard that Rod needed a drummer, so he asked me if I wanted to play with him, and I did. And eventually, I don't know what happened, how Les and Bob got away from us, but anyhow, it ended up with me and Jim Reese and Rod Crosby and a variety of other people.
Well, and I've got a reel-to-reel recording here, 1969. You guys were playing at the Fort Bliss NCO Club, and I went out there and recorded that a couple of sets that night. And I'm going to have to figure out a way that I can play some of this great music that you all were doing that night without the music police coming down on me. This is this is one of the biggest problems of being a podcaster, is that you got to deal with ASCAP and BMI and CSAC. And I, even though I'm not going to make any money off of that music, it's not my intention. But hopefully, in time, I can share some of these great sounds that you guys were doing that night. It was a great recording. It came out really well. I even wrote on the tape box that it's in, Dalton Powell playing on my ride cymbal that night. I had loaned you, I don't know why that even happened, but I had loaned you my one of my cymbals that night. So, and I had wrote, I guess that was I was proud of that moment that Dalton's playing on some of my equipment.
Well, I was known to break a few cymbals back then.
Well, this one would have been pretty hard, man. I still have this thing, man. I tell you, it's had a lot of licks on it, and it still keeps on ticking. But yeah,
love my old cymbals.
Yeah, they're. I've got a bunch of them out in the garage still, but and don't want to get rid of them. But after your stint with Rod Crosby, I know you did some other great things as well. You played with another local band by the name of Moon Pie Dance Band.
Oh yeah, the Moon Pigs.
Yeah, the Moon Pigs, and talk about that a little bit. I mean, you all backed up some big people. In fact, my wife and I even helped cater a concert that you all did at the Haskins Center one night with Emmylou Harris and Willie Nelson.
Right.
Yeah. We that was a good show. And
Doug Neal, who is Moon Pie, and I go back a long way. We were old friends, and the original Moon Pie had gone on a big tour of the West Coast and up in Montana and North Dakota and all up in there. And when they came back, nobody liked anybody, and they just broke up. They were all burned out.
Yeah.
And I had moved out here to the Upper Valley, and Jack Woodbury and Randy Jones and Doug Neal and all those guys lived out here in the Upper Valley already. So I had friends out here, and I moved out here, and right after the original Moon Pie broke up, one day Doug came by and said, "Hey, man, I'm thinking about putting a band together. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And a few days later, Randy Jones came by and said, "Hey, man, I'm thinking about putting a band together. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure." And a few days later, Jack Woodbury came by and said, "Hey, man, I've been thinking about putting a band together." But anyhow, before, the Moon Pie, 3 of the guys got back together, and they just replaced Gary Duncan on drums.
On drums, yeah.
With me.
Yeah.
I was with Moon Pie about 5 years, and we had a lot of fun. We played we opened for everybody that came to town.
I remember, man. No, those were good shows. In fact, I've seen several different combinations of that group, but you guys have had some tremendous players in that band. I mean, Bobby Napier on fiddle, man, and he was Tammy Wynette's fiddle player for years, and some great singers, great players. I think Patty Tiscareño was even a member of that group at one point. I think she did. She did some singing.
Patty's my all-time favorite local singer.
Well, me too.
I just love Patty.
Me too, man. Patty's a great one, and so is her husband, one of my favorite drummers. But you're my first favorite, and then I'll put Andre in there after that, But
Andre's also my favorite drummer.
But
we go back a long way too.
Yeah, you guys do. And if you were to open, playing with a band or whatever for an artist, who would that be for now? If you wanted to do it all over again, who would that artist be, and why would you pick them?
Wow, I don't even know where to start on that. I tell you, back when we hooked up with Emmylou Harris, she had been one of my favorites for a long time, and that was one of the highlights of what I did. And even though I didn't even get to see her except from backstage, 'cause she didn't get out and mingle with everybody.
Right.
But I still, that's Doug Neal has, of course, he wangled a picture of him standing next to her with a big smile. But
yeah, she's
that was a highlight, and that's, about as good as anybody I can think of to open for.
Well, she's still getting it done. I saw her in Austin probably about 3 or so years ago, and our son's a photographer, of course, with Getty Images, and so he had got us tickets to go to the Moody Theater, Austin City Limits, where they do the Austin City Limits, and saw her that night with the guitar player that she had been with for like 25 years. and can't think of his name right now, but incredible. That was a great show, and I could see why you would pick her as one of your stars to play behind. Now, here's another one I'm going to throw your way, though, because you have played with him before, and I know how much fun you had with it, because I was there that night with my wife, and we saw you guys play with Chuck Berry.
Oh, yeah. It was me and Bobby Sotelo.
Yep.
And had a keyboard player. And that was kind of a weird night. I mean, Chuck never had a band of his own that I know of. He never toured with one. He just picked up the locals because any rock and roll band back in those days could play Chuck Berry music. I grew up playing Chuck Berry music with Jim Reese. He played Chuck Berry better than Chuck Berry did.
He did. Yep.
And I remember one night some college fraternity brought him to town, and they hired this little band, I guess. Jim Reese and I were playing in this band, and I don't remember who was on bass, but they hired us to back up Chuck Berry at this big club out on Dyer Street. And I remember most of the time Chuck Berry was the show, but on one of the songs he turned around and gave it to Jim because he'd been listening to Jim back there. And when he heard Jim playing Chuck Berry, outplaying him, he took the guitar and just slid it around behind him and just backed off, pointed at Jim. That was excellent. Boy, Chuck Berry and Jim Reese both playing Chuck Berry. And I mean, if you'd have been in the audience with your eyes closed, you wouldn't have known the difference.
Yeah, that's I know that's very true. He could play anybody that he wanted to, just like him and better. And what was amazing about him is that he could do it first time out. I mean, when he played a song, he didn't have to go through it a whole bunch of times to figure it out. He was one of those that had kind of like a photographic memory. He could listen to the song and pick it up real quick.
Yeah, he was an excellent natural musician.
Yeah, really, really was. Those were incredible times, my friend. Really, really good times.
The one you were talking about at the Civic Center, Chuck Berry was on he opened basically for Little Richard,
right?
Who came in with a huge band and just kicked everybody's ass. But it was just, about 10 minutes before we went on, I finally got close enough to Chuck Berry to say, "Hey, I'm your drummer tonight. What are we going to do?" And he said, "Well, I believe I'll play some Chuck Berry." And that was our rehearsal.
Yeah, I remember you guys had a keyboard player that night too with you, right?
Yeah, and I don't even remember who that was. It was just somebody that the promoter picked up to back him up,
Wow.
But the sound system was so terrible that the whole time I didn't have a clue what song I was playing. I'd listen to the rhythm or get the countdown and just fake it because I never heard him do anything. I could hear the bass and the guitars, and I could hear the rhythms, but most of the time I didn't even know what song I was playing.
Right.
Fortunately, they were all so much alike that it didn't really matter.
Just get in the groove and hold on, right?
Yeah. Just, but still, I can say I played a couple of gigs with Chuck Berry.
Yeah, you can. And rightfully so. I wanted to ask you, back in the time when you were playing with Reese and everything in El Paso, I'd always heard the story that Jim was dating or had dated Sharon Tate. Can you talk a little bit about that? What year that would have been? And
well, I really don't remember that. I remember hearing that, but I don't really know any details. I imagine if you talk to anybody that was going to urban high school or lived out in Northeast in those days,
right,
most of them will tell you that they dated Sharon Tate.
or
I've talked to 10 guys that dated Sharon Tate.
in their dreams, right?
Yeah, really. But whether Jim dated her or not, I don't remember,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he, I remember him ever talking much about it, but but I did remember hearing that story. And anyway, I was just curious. I figured you might have some inside scoop for us, some juicy stories or whatever. But no.
No, I don't remember anything about that. But
yeah,
I know I talked to several people that said that they had dated her.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe he did.
Yeah.
Well, I'd also heard that Bobby Fuller and Charles Manson were friends and all that crap. But when Bobby died, Charles Manson was in prison.
Yeah.
That Manson crap didn't start till several years after Bobby died.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was, I'm sure you remember Ivan Padilla that had California Concept here in El Paso.
Yeah.
You remember him? Well, and he was good friends with Jay Sebring and all that. That was all kind of tied in with all of that stuff going on out there with Manson and Sharon Tate and everything. So, you can get all kinds of different stories and everything. I know when we were out in L.A., we certainly heard different versions and different stories as well, with some of the people that we were around out there and got to know. But anyway, not necessarily the history we want to remember much about, but it happened, and then anyway, all we can do is just move on. I was going to ask you, if, in the music industry, we've seen so many major changes and everything. What if you could see the music industry change, in any good way that you could think of, what would it be that you would like to see happen? I know there's been a lot of things that have taken place, especially here in El Paso. And you want to talk a little bit about, why so many of us went on the road and why we left El Paso. I mean, El Paso, first of all, has been known for such great musicians. But you want to talk a little bit about the process of working in El Paso and trying to, what you do when you want to go beyond that.
Well, El Paso never has, although people will say different, it's never had a huge music scene. There have been thousands of little bars and little venues that come and go, but there's never really been a giant music scene because the taste in music is so varied, for one thing. And, I did an interview one time. There were several of us on a panel with, what's his name from All That Music?
Oh, George Reynoso.
Yeah, George. I was
on that panel with you that day.
Right. Yeah. And you remember he kept trying to talk about the friction between the Mexicans and the white guys. And I kept telling him, George, there wasn't any of that bullshit. The only difference between me and the Mexican guys was our taste in music, and there were Mexican guys that played with white bands and white guys that played with Hispanic bands,
Exactly.
It had nothing to do with who your grandmother was. Right. It was whether you could play the damn song or not,
And I think that's why Johnny Fairchild and his Key Club, and there were other clubs around town back in those days that, you had all kinds of bands playing in there. You could see probably Bobby and the Premiers, or you could see, there were so many great local bands, and it's just a matter of who you wanted to see and hear and all that. But I think you could see a combination of all different types of music. And you're right. I don't remember those racial issues back in those days in El Paso.
No, I don't think there ever were any. I mean, I played with Mexican guys almost from day one.
Sure, me too.
Bobby Sotelo was one of my best friends.
Right.
And he and I played together off and on for years. Yeah. And it just he preferred the music that we played with Rod Crosby, and that stuff. That's what he wanted to play.
Right.
He could have played with Bobby and the Premiers or the Rhythmaires or any of those guys, but he just preferred our music. And, it's the same thing. There were a lot of white guys, especially horn players, that they went to play with the Mexican guys because of the music they played,
Sure.
The Mexican guys like horn sections.
Yeah. And there were some good ones that came out of El Paso.
Oh, hell yeah.
Man, there were some really good horn players.
There were some great bands back in those days. The guys with horns, like even, ask old Bobby. He'll tell you. Bobby Rosales, he played with 1,000,000 of them.
He did, and I mean, and played on shows with, James Brown and a lot of the great bands that came to El Paso, that were Hispanic bands, and boy, they were great. Tremendous, great. It
wasn't because they were Hispanic; it's just because they were good musicians.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell everybody now that I was talking earlier about that time that I saw you guys for the first time, and it just blew me away, and I made that wish that someday I want to be with a band like that one. Well, it was just a few years later that in 1968, it was like 5 years later, that dream came true for me, because when a lot of my friends already know this story, but this is for the listening viewership or listenership here, out there, that I met two guys my freshman year at UTEP in the music department there, the vocal department. And one of them was a guy named Gail Hageman that you went to high school with, DP. And, and
Gail and I were good friends.
And then
I played with Gail too.
Yeah, you did. And then the keyboard player that we met at that same time was a guy named Richard Greco. And anyway, the three of us, I said, well, I play drums, and here's a bass player, and here's a guy that plays keys. Let's think about maybe putting a group together. So we did, and that was the formation of the Basic Sound, and that group was the group that kept me going for 4 years that I was at UTEP. I played 6 nights a week with that band, and I got to share.
I used to come hear you at the Roadway Inn.
Yeah, at the Knights Club there.
Knights Club, yeah.
And I got to share with everybody that the guitar player that played with us in that group for 3.5 years was Jim Reese from the Bobby Fuller Four.
Right.
And boy, that was when my dream really came true, because I got to.
It was a damn good band too.
Well, thank you. It was a neat band. We had a lot of fun, and we had a good following. And of course, we were the house band. We'd bounce between the Knights Club and the Jet Set Club, which was owned by Jerry Wolf, who had both of those Roadway Inns, the one on Dyer and the one there at Bassett Center. And but boy, that was a great gig, because I could go to college and not have to worry about money, really, because I was working every night and got to play my music, and and got my studies done. I'd study when I'd get home, or I'd do a little bit in between classes and stuff, and managed to beat the draft, because boy, I tell you, it was my incentive to stay in college and keep the grades, because I was number 72 on the draft numbers, so I was definitely going to be drafted if I hadn't kept my grades up. But anyway, that's why I named this episode what I did. That this was my wish, and the wish came true. And DP, it's been an absolute gas visiting with you today and doing this show. I'm glad you took the time to come on here with me and share some of your stories.
Always good talking to you, Rick.
And
we have a lot of common history back there.
We really do. We really do. And and I appreciate you so much. I really look forward to the time that we can get back together and start doing some things together, man. We used to go and drink wine over at La Viña and watch some movies and go to concerts and stuff, and movies. And it's kind of come to a standstill for this last year with this COVID thing and all. We're all trying to be careful and safe and all, but
I've had both my shots, so you can come by here anytime.
Yeah, well, I'm still working on it. We're still on the list, so we're hopefully that's going to take place pretty quick, but
I got both of mine, so I'm free to go.
Yeah. Well, thank you, my friend. I think we're going to wrap this episode up, but thank you for being a part of it. I think people are going to like what they hear with this one. This has been a lot of fun,
Well,
and we'll be talking real soon, my buddy. Okay.
all right. See you.
See ya, man. Take care. Bye-bye.
You bet. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and let us know what you think. To catch all the latest from me, please go to Talkin' Rock Radio, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.